Hi, this is Howie from Prime Your Pump, entertaining and actionable self-improvement. And today's lesson is really one of the more important lessons to me that the team at Prime Your Pump wants to give to you. And it's how to create a well-rounded memory of a loved one. You wouldn't do this for someone who's very young. You would probably do it for someone who's older, who has an entire life to reflect upon. And just as an example, I did it for my mother, all right? Because when I was 30, my mother was 60, and I realized I really didn't know my mother very well. I knew her as a mother, all right? But I didn't know her as a volunteer. I didn't know her as an athlete. I didn't know her as an artist. There were all kinds of ways I didn't know my mother. I didn't know her as a friend, all right? So what I wanted to do is I wanted to find out all these characteristics of my mother, and that's what this technique is going to do. So, and that's what Prime Your Pump is going to teach you now. So there's a 7-step procedure for doing it. So I'll explain in terms of what I did for my mother, and then you can copy the procedure. The first thing is that my mother was very obsessive about keeping her photo albums. And she had photo albums for each year in her life. So at 60, she had 60 photo albums. Obviously, the ones when she was very little were very thin albums, just a few pictures in it, all right? But what I did was, out of the 60 albums, I randomly took 5 pictures from each one, all right, that had my mother in it, just haphazardly. And just so you know, I put a Post-it note where the picture went and a Post-it note on the back of the picture so you could put the picture back in the album, or else they'll just sit on a shelf and they'll never get back where they're supposed to be. And then what I did was I invited 12 of her friends over from when she was very, very little all the way through recent friends, family and friends. There were a dozen people there, all with different characteristics, fellow artists, fellow volunteers, okay, my brother, okay, my father, all different kinds of people with all different perspectives on my mother. So we laid out the 300 cards, the 300 pick photographs on the table, and in no particular order, but facing in one direction. And then in silence, and this is very, very, very important that it's in silence, because people move the cards into piles which seem thematically similar. So for example, if my mother in 2 pictures was holding a pot, maybe, you would put them into the pile, and the pile eventually would be the cook, just as an example. So in silence, what these 12 people do is they're moving these photographs around, and eventually they wound up with 12 piles. You should expect to have between 5 and 15 piles. That's usually what happens. And then for each of these 12 piles, what I did was I had them name the piles. Oh, there's one thing I forgot, and that is that you cannot use chronology to make the piles. In other words, it can't be B when she's 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, etc. You cannot use chronology, okay? You have to make the thematic piles another way. So what I did was, for example, the name of one of my mother's piles was B Holds a Grudge. And so what I did was I went out and I found 2 stories for each pile. And that's what I used in my mother's eulogy. So just as an example, in the B Holds a Grudge pile, one of the stories was that one day my father got a letter in the mail from my mother, which was a very unusual event because he literally lived across the street, okay, from where he worked. So why is she sending him a letter? He opens up the letter, and it's a picture of a cartoon from the New Yorker magazine. And it's a picture of a woman with an egg on a spoon over a boiling pot of water. Her husband is holding a stopwatch in one hand and a gun to her head in the other hand and saying, "I want a 3-minute egg." And the reason she sent that to him was because 19 years earlier, my father had accused my mother of not knowing how to make a proper 3-minute egg. So B holds a grudge. And he actually said, if you think you got away with something because she died, you're wrong. She's waiting for you on the other side, and she's going to get you. So once this is done, all right, you have all of these from these different points of view, different thematic piles. Some may be rough, so you might want to massage the name a little bit. Get a couple of stories for each pile, and what you will have is a wonderful memory of a loved one. Now, in terms of using it or losing it and making it actionable, just remember to follow the 7-step procedure, all right? And there are some great times to use this stuff. It's usually when someone is older, like I said before, at eulogies, at retirement parties, okay, 50th wedding anniversaries, 70th birthday parties, 80th birthday parties. So this is something I think that you really, really should give a shot at using. That's all I have this week, all right? But until next week, remember, okay, to read and share our other blog posts, and if you like them, to like them, and then subscribe to our weekly newsletter. So until next time, remember, prime your pump.